I'm guessing we're live. Are we live?
I think so.
Yes, this is very exciting. So, hello everyone watching at home. Welcome to the UK ACE Activism panel, which is very exciting. So I'm Jess. I'm the host today, and with me I've got Yasmin Benoit and Sarah Cosgrove, who are two fantastic ACE activists, and they're going to share their experiences and answer some questions. So just to introduce everyone, Sarah is a founder of the ACEs in STEM Discord server, where ACEs from all over the world can meet and discuss all manner of awesome things. They also started up multiple social media campaigns related to ACEs in STEM on Twitter and TikTok. She's been involved with several Asian queer groups, including BACQ ESEA, and has a podcast called Queer Cuz, which focuses on queer Filipino experiences. She's talked about LGBT plus identity in schools and youth groups, and they were shortlisted for the National Diversity Awards in recognition of their work earlier this year, which is very cool. Yasmin, I think, barely needs an introduction. She's an ACE model and writer, the mind behind several viral hashtags, including hashtag this is what asexual looks like, and hosted the first ACE-themed bar at London Pride in 2019. She's a veteran of the conference. She's appeared every year since 2018, and earlier this year launched an ACE Rights initiative in partnership with Stonewall to help show policymakers in the UK that things need to change for us. So did either of you want to add anything, or does that just about cover it for introductions?
Yeah, it pretty much covers it.
Yeah, you did good.
Nice. Okay, so we're going to start off with a big question. How do you define activism? That is not the right. Yeah, there we go. Wrong one. Great start.
Who wants to go first?
I don't mind. I can go. Well, this is an interesting one to try to define, because when asked to do this panel, I was really happy to be asked. But I did have this sort of moment of, am I an activist? Do I know what activism is? To be able to come onto here. So it's something I've thought a bit about and also sought advice on. But I like to think there was a really great definition that somebody gave me, which was about being goal orientated towards social and political change. And activism can look like a lot of different things. We might stereotype it as, going on political marches or rallies, which is one form of activism, but it's not solely the only type of activism, because that may not be something that anybody has access to or may want to do themselves. So yeah, that's broadly how I would define activism. But it could also look like, and when I say it looks like a lot of different things, it could be things like community building, which is why I feel like I fit into. But yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I think I was the one when we were looking for people to take part in this. I was like, oh, you should ask Sarah. Because my understanding, I know some people have very rigid definitions of activism, and they're very specific about who is and who isn't. But I think that for me, as long as you're actively trying to make a positive impact and uplift and aid in the progression of a marginalized group or community or social issue, then I think that what you're doing is essentially activism. And as Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of ways in which you can do that, whether it's you can be one of those people that's out there on protests all the time, but personally, I've never really been much of a protest person. I think that the people that are I think the tech people that are helping out with this, that is a form of activism. And the people who are archiving or just collecting data or even just reposting things, that is a form of activism, as much as the kind of blatant in your face stuff that you hear about all the time. And for me, because activism is so vast, is one of the reasons why when people ask what I do, I just like to say activist, because it sort of encompasses all the different areas of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's one of those big words that no one ever really actually defines, which makes it really hard. yeah, I think I've definitely had the same sort of thing as you, Sarah, because I used to go and do Q&As in schools, and one of the kids asked one time, do you consider yourself an activist? And the teacher was horrified when we all said no. So I was like, no, you are. So yeah, it's definitely something that people sort of have different opinions about, but it's something that's definitely so broad. But yeah, and you're both involved in so many amazing different initiatives, and there are so many ways to be engaged in activism. So how did you choose the projects that you work with? So how did you find like your focus, your one thing that you wanted to work on? Let me find the banner.
And Sarah, you can go first if you want.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah, sure. But also, there's a sort of vibrating noise going on in the back. I think
yeah,
Jess,
that might be my
yours.
laptop fan.
The projects I choose to work on. One thing I would say, the thing I've learned is try not to work on too many, which is the thing that I seem to wanted to do, because I want to just do all the things. There's always so many things to work on. But also the way I'm kind of going forward with it might change as well. But I kind of started off with ACEs in STEM. It was originally me and my friend Jasmine Scarlett, who we wanted to meet other ACEs who worked or studied STEM subjects. So STEM, by the way, is science, technology, engineering, maths, if you're not familiar with that acronym. And I said, oh, should I set up a Discord server? Because Jazz was the one who suggested social, and I said, well, what if I set up a Discord server so we can, coordinate some of them? It might make it easier to then also share out dates with people who may not have Twitter. And we did that, and then it turned into a community space. And I realized through discussions with different ACEs in STEM, also my own observations of different STEM events and conferences, that I didn't necessarily see anybody talk about being ACE themselves or stating that they're ACE, at least to what I could observe. And so I wanted to raise the visibility of people who are ACE, and also learning generally about how ACEs tend to be less visible, but also just thinking about the UK government survey that was published in 2018, how we're less likely to be out in the workplace as well. So I thought, well, that would definitely extend to STEM as well. So I started a social media campaign for International Asexuality Day 2021. That was the very first one. And I just posted different profiles, and I did the same thing the following year as well, because people appreciated it, and also were able to find even more people by finding, more people were able to see them, connect with them, learn about their work. So that's kind of how we got started with that. And I just kept on doing it, really. But going forward, I think I've realized how important, as a person of color, how it's really important for me to also pursue projects in that direction as well. And I've been very, very lucky to have had conversations with many Asian activists. I've also had many conversations with Filipino ACEs as well. And I think, for my projects in the future, that's where I particularly like to go.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I think maybe I should take a leaf out of Sarah's book and narrow it down, because I said, there's so many different things that you could focus on. So how do you focus? Like, genuinely, I don't. I just do everything. If the opportunity presents itself, my technique is to pretty much say yes to absolutely everything. I think only more recently have I been like, actually, this isn't feasibly possible for me to, I've had to start saying, sorry, I do not have time to help on your book and your movie and consult on your thing and then do your research. And then I've had to be actually, sorry, I gotta narrow it down a little bit. But I feel like there's so many kind of gaps, and I guess that just because people have heard of me, I tend to be a kind of first stop for people that want something done. And then sometimes I know that if I say, actually, I can't do it, it just won't get done. So I always feel the pressure to just say yes, and just, if I don't know how to do it, I'll just learn how to do it. But fortunately, I do have quite a diverse skill set, so I'm quite good at adjusting. So I mean, I my work is really all over the place at the moment. Some of it's writing, some of it's speaking, some of it's consulting, some of it's stuff you see, some of it's stuff you don't see, some of it's things that are take a long time, some of it's research based, and then there's the modeling stuff as well. So I think my main thing is just I just want to do things that feel constructive, and they're actually going to amount to something and have a positive impact. Like I don't, that's why like when people ask me like, oh, why don't you do like more TikTok videos or more like YouTube videos and stuff, it's like I feel like that's kind of covered. And I feel like I don't think like for me personally with like the way my work is, that would be very constructive or have much longevity for me. So that's kind of an example of one of the few ways where I am like, I don't just want to do it for the sake of doing it. Like I want it to actually be like beneficial in the long term. And that's kind of my main criteria, which is why it ends up being all over the place, but hopefully it ends up being useful.
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point about, because I think there's everybody does, because I thought about the, oh, you know, I could do like the ACE 101 stuff. I'm like you said, I feel like it's been covered, and that's why I do other things. But at the same time, there's so much that needs to be done. So it feels like, well, if I don't, yeah. So when you said that, oh, if I don't say yes, then it won't get done, and then you feel like so much responsibility. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I was kind of just nodding along to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, God, knowing how to say no is definitely a skill that we all need to learn to do better. Oh dear, it's very hard. Yeah, so Sarah, I know you work in STEM, and Yas, or your daily life, and if so, how does that happen? How does it work? Tell us everything.
Yasmin, do you want to go first for this one?
Oh, actually, I think you should, because I think I know your work's sort of different. So I'd be curious to hear your answer.
Okay. So it's it's tricky to explain my employment because it's lots of bits and bobs stitched together into 5 days a week. But basically, I work 2 days a week at a science education organization. It's called the Association for Science Education, and the project I work on there is called Inclusion in Schools. And the interest I've taken has been particularly LGBT plus inclusion, although not solely that. And it's been really helpful to bring sort of ACE perspectives into that, and also being involved in the community, you get the nuances of things like language as well, because some of the things that some people can actually be quite afraid of actually is making sure that language is inclusive, and am I using the right language, and just having those as I say, having a sense of the nuances and what I learned from the community is really, really helpful, as well as, oh, there's all these different people in STEM who are working, who are ACE or just queer broadly, who are working all these different types of professions. So it really helps influence that. I also work a day a week for an LGBT plus education charity called Schools.uk. They founded LGBT History Month, and it's really good to have a diverse range of people in sort of as part of the organization, and being able to bring ACE rep and ACE perspectives into that is also a good thing, because it means that that leads to that perspective being included in the resources that we develop as well. And then I do freelance outside of that, and some of the sort of personal, I guess, yeah, my sort of personal sort of science communication projects. I'll give an example of some of the things I've done. So last year for ACE Week, I produced content for TikTok. It was just, I'm going to do a project. I want to see if I can combine ACE themes with science, and I could do it. And I did this for fun, but I also wanted something to be creative for the community. And it was just really nice to be able to bring in queer themes into my work. And it is absolutely possible. And when I train researchers, I could be training science researchers who are queer themselves, and to say, hey, when you communicate science to the public, sharing your research with audiences, you can be yourself. And that's something that I try to kind of bring across in my training sessions, is that whatever you bring to science communication, you should bring yourself, whatever you choose that is. For me, a lot of it is identity. It doesn't have to be for you, but if it is something you want to bring, like, absolutely. So yeah, so it really comes into a lot of my sort of work amazingly. And I think that since realizing them ACE and doing the activism advocacy work I've been doing, it's definitely made my work better. Absolutely has. And I think it's to do with the perspectives it's brought, but also me as a person, how I've also changed. And realizing I'm ACE has also made me feel more confident in other ways as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting to hear, because, like, I mean, for me, I have a Master of Science degree from UCL, and that was in crime science. And so everyone kind of took that and like went to work in like the government or like MI5 and like that kind of stuff. And like pre-activism, all my friends ended up in like academia, and like I have a lot of friends who are teachers, so I was kind of the odd one out in that sense. And I kind of quickly realized after graduating that, or at least it felt like I wasn't going to be able to go into normal employment, or at least in a way that actively used my degree while continuing to do the stuff that I was doing. Like it wouldn't, like the timelines wouldn't work out. And I also knew that like I probably wasn't very suitable for that kind of stuff. So I didn't really see how I would feasibly be able to combine the two going down like a more conventional route. So I just kind of decided to focus on the activism without really thinking that it would end up being a career of sorts, or like a way to earn an income, or something that would end up taking up as much as my time as it has ended up doing. But similarly to Sarah, it's kind of just like a mishmash of a whole bunch of things that ends up kind of becoming full-time, like between, you know, meeting the article deadlines, and then like I speak at like universities and businesses quite a lot, and then the research stuff, and then the project consulting and all that. When you kind of add it together, it kind of makes a full-time thing. But so I guess in that sense, the activism has influenced my employment because it has literally become my employment. But then there's also some aspects where like it doesn't overlap. Like when it kind of comes to like most of the modeling stuff, like they really could care less about whether like what my sexual orientation is and like what my other side of the work is. It's like, just wear the clothes, make it look good, and go home. Like they really, like that's, it's funny sometimes online when people are like, yeah, she just kind of says she's asexual so she can get more modeling jobs. It's like, you've never stepped foot in the fashion industry, have you? That's really not, it's based on your face and your appearance. They do not care about what universities you've spoken at before they book you to wear a bra. So yeah, so in some aspects, like it kind of doesn't really overlap, but it's kind of, it's become quite interesting because it's also sort of impacted my daily life in the sense that now when people ask, which is a, you know, very common question of, oh, so what do you do? It like what should be a very like easy answer that ends very quickly ends up becoming like a like that very question. I'm like, here we go, because that like that has to become a coming out story inherently. The second I say, oh, I do like activism and stuff, like it, then it's like, oh, about what? And then it has to become a whole thing. So it sort of ended up kind of intertwining in my daily life to a very large degree, sometimes larger than I would like sometimes, but I am pretty grateful for how it's all turned out. It's a probably more of a fun job than I would have been doing if I had just went to work in the government like all the other graduates on my course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm loving the fact that I'm the only one here who is not a scientist. So, you know. But yeah, this is really interesting. Our next question is, does anyone have any tips or advice for anyone thinking of becoming an activist? So how to start, how to deal with criticism, anything you can think of.
I feel like I'm really bad at answering this question because I feel like all the advice I give just ends up like putting people off, because I'm always like I'm always like so focused on the cons, because I always think that one thing that I think they don't really, which is kind of the hurdle I kind of encounter quite quickly, is like sometimes it impacts your employability in a good way, as Sarah was saying. Like you can really like integrate it into your work and it can go very well. But as I know people that, you know, work on hiring people, activist is a big red flag when it comes, because people don't like to hire people that are known for making a lot of noise and complaining about social stuff, because that kind of means they're likely to complain a lot in the workplace and they're likely to make stands about everything, and not everybody likes that. So I think it's something to kind of take into consideration if you're thinking of doing anything publicly, especially if you're like young. Like how, like, is that going to be something that's going to be beneficial to you in like 5 years time? Is always something to keep in mind, depending on what kind of work you're in. It could be great or it could like not be so great. So my advice would be to just definitely think about that, especially if it's going to have your like first and last name and face permanently attached to it. What goes on the internet stays on the internet.
Yeah. This is, I'm just trying to think about how to answer this question myself, because also becoming an activist, I'm like, well, I'm sort of even sure, like, so in terms of how I define myself as an activist. So I guess one thing I would say is if you're not sure if you're an activist or not, and like, oh, am I an activist? I don't think it kind of matters. Like, if you feel like you're doing a good thing, then the label doesn't matter so much, if that makes sense. Like, I say this to people going to science communication about like, well, I want to get into a psychom job, and well, if you're happy in that job on the way there, then is it so bad that it's not psychom? But yeah, so it's similar advice I kind of give when I give that kind of career advice. I think also you can start with really small things. Like, so for example, there's so many people, by the way, working behind the scenes of this conference, like huge amount of people. You know, there's people working behind the tech. You've got all like the mods, not just the people that you see on screen. So you can always help with things like that and be connected with other people in that way and learn about what they do. And as you kind of get to know the community there, you can kind of see, okay, what is it that I might want to get involved in? So it's not necessarily something that you have to throw in, you know, straight away into something. You can kind of get familiar with what's going on as well, because there's a lot of really good stuff that's also been done and has happened that I also still want to learn about, because when I started, I didn't want to just weigh in and be like, oh, this is a problem, I'm going to go fix that. I wanted to think, no, what's actually happened, what is the reality, and be respectful of all the, you know, the people that's come before me as well. So yeah, so it's kind of about make sure you kind of try as much as you can to learn from like what is going on in the community already and what work is happening, and bear in mind that there's a lot of stuff that does happen that isn't put on social media. There's a lot of very good activism work that's done that isn't on social media. And therefore, also on that note, things that you see on social media, just because you see it on social media doesn't mean it's necessary activism as well. Kind of on that side of it. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also, I think, you know, as you kind of touched upon there in terms of like whether you call yourself an activist or not, there are some cons to act, because when you say, oh, I'm an activist, that comes with an expectation. If you're just kind of like, yes, oh, I'm just trying to I just want to help out in this, I just kind of want to do that, then you're just a helpful person. But when you say, oh, I'm an activist, then it's like, oh, all right, well, then you should be doing this and you should be doing this. And then people have expectations of what you're supposed to be doing, how often you're supposed to be doing it, and what the outcome should be. So labeling it isn't always entirely helpful. So sometimes it's easier just to kind of do your own thing and not think too much about, you know, how it's going to be described or whether you're actively trying to fill a certain role. Sometimes it's just easier just to do whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Some great tips. So just a reminder for people at home, we are open for audience questions. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them. I think we're using SliDo for that. So pop them in there and we'll see what you guys come up with. Our next question, which has just shown up on the bottom of the screen: do you have any advice on setting boundaries for how much of your personal experience you share when doing activism work?
That's I've had to kind of learn that gradually, because I'm a very like open person. I'm not very like squeamish with most subjects. So like if you ask me something, there's a fair chance I'll answer. And it's only now where after a while I'm kind of like, I feel like I've had this conversation, or I feel like this isn't entirely like a good faith question. And now I'm a bit more confident to say, actually, like, I'm not going to go there. I feel like I don't need to go into this. I feel like I don't need to address this. And it can, setting any kind of boundaries in this area can be hard, because I guess one of the unspoken things of being an activist is that you're sort of, it's your job to educate, and it's hard to educate if you don't answer the question. So you kind of feel like a sort of inherent pressure to make sure that, you know, you are keeping people informed, and that if they ask something that you're going to answer in a way that is informative. And it can be hard to do that if you want to kind of gloss over certain subjects. But yeah, I think that it is sort of important to set those boundaries out early, because as I said before, what you say, it will be out there forever potentially. So you don't necessarily want to say something that's going to be out there forever and end up being embarrassing. And also I think that it's important to realize that like whoever's asking you, it's not your, like, it's kind of their job to work around what you do and don't say. It's not really your job. Like if you're doing an interview, it's the interviewer's job to have other questions and to find other ways of getting interesting or an educational information. It's not really your job to sort of conduct where the interview is going to go and make it easy for them. So you don't really, I think it's helpful like not to worry so much about that.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, because I think if there's the sort of time when I would do this would be probably more when I'm doing like a Q&A session of a presentation rather than, because interviews is something I've not done as much. I'm married, and usually I'm very, as I say, I'm quite an open person, but because I want to respect the person I'm married to, there's certain questions that I know are like a no-go, and I would just be very blunt about it and say I don't want to answer a question, but I might answer a question in a general way rather than this is my answer for me, if that makes sense. And that's how I tend to set my personal boundaries, is that I'll just answer it in a different way that is not about me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. Yeah, so next question. Okay. What's the most exciting or unexpected opportunity you've had as a result of your activism work?
Probably literally everything I've ever done is unexpected because I didn't go into it expecting anything. So literally every single thing that happens every day, I'm like, oh, cool, that's unexpected. Like, for example, on Monday, I'm flying out to Serbia and I'm speaking at the International Human Rights Conference, and I'm going to be out there for the week. And that was unexpected because I've never been to Serbia and I've never spoken at a human rights conference before. And from like little things, like when I get invited to speak at like Oxford and Cambridge and things like that's really cool because I never really thought I'd do that, right up to like, magazine covers and awards and red carpets and things that I also doesn't necessarily go with the territory. So not anything I expected. But yeah, literally pretty much everything I've ever done, anything you see me doing is a treat for me.
I mean, I could say to start off with this right now, I'm just thinking, wow, I'm on like a panel at an ACE conference about UK activism with Yasmin Benoit. I'm just like, so this is probably one of the things I was not expecting. I think this is very, very cool. The National Diversity Awards next week as well. So the way that process works is that somebody nominates you, you then get voted for, and then you get shortlisted. So it was a colleague at work who nominated me originally, who I'm very thankful for. And then the voting process, because I guess a lot of the responses were people who had seen me talk about being ACE on Twitter in particular, or on TikTok. So it was really nice to see some of the votes came through that as well. And the voting process definitely helped for me to getting shortlisted. So yeah, that was like a really lovely thing. But one more thing I'm going to mention, there's a thing right behind me. It's like a little trophy thing. I go to a science communication conference every year, run by an organization called BIG. It's an acronym. And as part of that, they do, it's fairly informal, but it's basically a science demo competition. And this year I decided to enter for the first time. I've always been intimidated by it because people have very flashy, wonderful demos. And in a way, I kind of see this, what I do, as a form of activism, because I use a science demo as a way of talking about asexuality, kind of like what I was doing with my TikTok content, but it was a bit more of an analogy for the split attraction model. And I talked about it and tried to talk about asexuality in a positive way, which was, we all see the world through different lenses, and this one happens to be mine. And the way that the winner's chosen is by an audience vote, and I was chosen. So that was really, really nice, and something that was really unexpected as well. And I sometimes wonder about, am I talking about asexuality too much in these spaces? Where people might be like, okay, could you just tone it down a little bit? We get it, you're ace, great, wonderful. So, we don't care. And so to be able to do that in a space and people really liked it and really appreciated it was something that I didn't necessarily expect. And it kind of gave me a bit of, I don't know, that actually it was okay to do this. And I don't know, it kind of gives you a bit of positivity, because unfortunately I do see a lot of the negative sides of activism as well, but it was quite nice to see that.
Wow, it sounds like you're both almost living the dream, to be honest. But Sarah, I had exactly the same reaction as you with the conference, and also when I was on one of the focus groups at Stonewall Project, I was like, I have to speak to Yasmin Benoit, what do I do? So yeah, next question. What is the strangest misconception that you've heard about asexuality? This should be so much fun.
Oh, there's so many, like, and some of them are specifically about asexuality. Like, I've heard some crazy ones about myself that's also because of asexuality. So I'm trying to like narrow it into. I guess yeah, this is sort of about asexuality. It was the one where the gay agenda and Stonewall had medicated children to make them trans and therefore make them asexual, so that when I started my project, it was to make money out of the army of transgender asexual children that we had created through our medication scheme. So that was fun. I like that one. That was kind of creative. I was like, cool, I made an army of asexual children, like this is like X-Men or something. So yeah, I feel like that's kind of like the weirdest one I've heard of recently. So a lot of people really went for it. Like there's a genuine belief that that's a thing.
I can't top that, I'm afraid. Mine are like the generic thing of like, that I'm not. I remember like somebody saying, "Oh, so you're not going to have children." That will tend to be those kind of misconceptions, which is why I'm like, I don't think I could top that one at all.
Well, they think we can't have children, but they do think that we can corrupt and create an army of children that aren't ours. So, contributing to the population either way.
Wow. I love the ace agenda.
Loving this. People are so weird sometimes. Yeah, so bringing the mood down a little bit, have you ever had doubts or regrets about becoming a public face of asexuality? Was it an easy decision to make, or was it really hard?
Oh, I mean, it wasn't really, I guess kind of as Sarah mentioned, like you don't really know you're doing activism until you're doing it, and someone kind of refers to it that way, and then you're like, oh, I guess that's what I'm doing. But none of it's really intentional. So it wasn't a decision I made. It's just something you kind of notice, and then you're like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now. Yeah, I feel like, I guess the only kind of, I think if I had a bit more foresight, I would have thought into the kind of interpersonal impact of it more. Like, when you hear people say like, oh, once you're known for something, people treat you differently, and you sort of assume that's going to be people are going to be nicer, like interpersonally, but it's actually kind of the opposite. It's sort of like when people see you as being on any kind of pedestal, it's like you're kind of fair game for a level of kind of criticism and dehumanization that they wouldn't just do towards like a regular colleague. Like in kind of the way that like, people might like drag Kim Kardashian because no one actually knows her. And it's like, it's a celebrity. So like, what difference does it make? Like, they're never going to find out. But it's kind of weird when you're sort of in proximity to it and you're like, oh, I realize that I'm being perceived as like a face. Therefore, people do talk about me like that, even though I'm like, oh, I thought we were just hanging out. I didn't realize, but now I see that because I'm perceived differently, there's a level of sort of separation where it's okay to talk about me like that, as though I'm some kind of far removed being and not just a girl running around trying to be helpful. So like that aspect is kind of weird because I feel like it all like the first thing I ever did was the UK Sexuality Conference in 2018. Like that was my first introduction to anything. And I didn't really get a lot of time to just chill in the community and do like normal stuff before I became kind of like known within it. So I never really got to just like learn and hang out and get comfortable. It kind of got uncomfortable very, very quickly. So I still don't even feel like I have the chance to just be casually part of the group and be like, feel like it's like a safe space for me because it's sort of like different for me. And I didn't really think about that implication when I started doing stuff. So I feel like that's kind of the main downside, I think, for me.
Yeah. As I'm just trying to think about this question as well. I don't know yet. I wonder if it's a bit too early for me. I guess sometimes I can feel a bit of that. And this is something we briefly talked about at the Asian Aces panel earlier. When have the thing where there are people, so aces are less likely to come out, but also if you are part of other groups as well, that will have an impact on how out you are as well. And so something I thought about some months ago, I was asked to speak about asexuality for a science organization. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, have I had too many opportunities? Maybe I should pass this off to somebody else. But I kind of had this realization that if I did pass it on to somebody else, the likelihood of finding somebody who'd be comfortable talking about it would be white, and somebody in STEM as well. And that was just something I kind of realized. And then I kind of went, well, I feel like I have to sort of say yes to things in that way, from that perspective as well. But also, is there an expectation from me because of that? And that's just something I kind of think about. And I also be wary of, I don't want to be put on a pedestal either of like, oh, look at this really great person. I'm like, well, I'm a person at the end of the day, you know? And so it's really interesting to hear what you were saying, Yasmin. But I think I've been luckier in that because of the Aces of STEM Discord server, I've had that chance to be with the community in that way. But at the same time, when I've had this happen like sort of a couple times where people come up to you and go like, oh my gosh, you're this amazing person. I kind of like, I'm just, listen, I'm just a person. I like drinking tea. I
love drinking tea.
Yeah.
Obsessed.
I like cross stitch. I do normal everyday person things. So, yeah, I'm just a person. And I think that's the other thing is like, you also are a person who will, I think you can also be then potentially, I don't think that's something that happens to me, but I see this happen to you, Yasmin, where you're also put to like higher scrutiny when it's like, I think that's so unfair as well, that, yeah, because you're also put on that pedestal, you get so much more scrutiny. And, other things as well. And yeah, I don't think that's very fair. I think it's pretty horrible when that happens to you.
Thank you. And then the interpersonal thing is sort of, as you were saying, it's like you get into scrutiny. It's like, okay, I mean, but it tends not to be far removed. If it's inter-community things, then what happens when you go to the next event and you're like, oh, but this person's going to be, or they said this, but I'm supposed to not take it to heart, even though it kind of, and it's like, that's what kind of makes it weird. And then you just kind of end up like not doing as much, being casually within the community as much as you would like to, because you're always like, but I remember what this person said to me on Twitter. I heard what they said and they didn't know I heard them say that. So it kind of makes things kind of awkward, like in that sense.
Yeah. But the thing is also, with what's also interesting is that they probably would never say it to your face.
Right.
Which is the other thing. They wouldn't say it to your face.
Lots of faces are very shy in person, not so shy on Twitter. Will wallflowers in person, but on Twitter it's a different story.
Yes, the thing to remember here is that everyone is a person, even if you're only interacting with them on the internet. Fun fact that definitely no one already knew. So now we've got, what inspires you to keep going if you get negative or dismissive responses to the idea that visibility or representation for ACE people is important? I think it's kind of a related question, but yeah. Go for it.
I mean, I think that for me, I guess, and it's not even just in terms of people. I mean, people tell me all the time, like, your work is stupid, and like not necessarily ACE people, some do, but mainly like, like kind of commenters and stuff that are like, why would you even need to be an activist? Like, this makes no sense. Everything you're doing makes no sense. But, or even just kind of people that don't really like what I'm doing or don't really like the way that I'm doing it. But I think that, for every one of those people, like there could be like 100 of those people. But if there's just like one person that's like, that actually really made a difference to me, then I'm like, then the rest of that doesn't really matter. Like, I think that the only thing you can really do in life as a tiny little specks we are in this giant universe is at least try and make a little bit of a positive impact or make a little bit of a difference. Like, if you're gonna leave anything behind, leave that, even if it's to like 3 people in the world. So for me, it's like that. So it kind of makes it worthwhile. Like, if people were like, if people that I was trying to help were like, university, like, this is useless, it makes no impact to me anymore, then I'd probably stop doing it. But it's like, when people say like, oh, like this isn't important, like this representation isn't important, it's like, well, it isn't for you, and you're not relevant, you're not who I'm doing it for, so it doesn't matter. It's the people whose opinions that I like value. Like, as long as they find it helpful, then that's kind of what inspires me to keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I like that. It's about about like who's in terms of whose opinions matter. For me, I've had, I think, 3 people on different occasions who've told me that they realized they were ACE because I talked about it myself. So am I an activist, or am I just the asexual agenda at this point?
Recruiting.
Recruiting now. Here is a job description. You need to wear the ace color as the uniform. No, but it's just the fact that that sort of things happened where people DM me and say, "Oh, I am ace, but I'm not out," and I really appreciate you talking about it. And to all those people who do that, I appreciate you doing that so much, because it means I'm like, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Because sometimes you do stuff and you're like, is this the right thing? I really hope it is, because you want to do good, but it's really hard to know if it will do good because you don't see what the long-term impact's going to be for a long time. So I think it's just when you get that feedback from people, it's really, really appreciated. So if there's anybody who has impacted you like that, just tell them, because sometimes it's just quite hard to know if we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, all those heartwarming stories that you get they're wonderful. Love them. So next question, which aspect of your activism work do you most enjoy? Writing, public speaking, TV or radio, social media? You guys do so much stuff, so like this is probably going to be a hard decision.
Actually, for me, it's quite easy. I like the in-person stuff. Because I mean, including like during the past, because like I think when everything's on social media, it's harder to kind of gauge impact so much. Like everything it's sort of like parasocial, and even though it's like you're really interacting, it doesn't feel like as real sometimes. But like I love like when I'm like in a pride, or like, you know, I get to kind of run into these people in real life, or I'm at like, I love talking at like universities is fun because I sort of get to relive the university experience about the stress of actually having to write any essays, and you get to like meet the students, and you know, like I felt like that kind of stuff is like the most fun. I love being able to kind of connect with people one-on-one. Like I did a talk at a university, I think it was, well, I was in Cambridge, yeah, and it was funny because when I came in there, a girl came up to me and was like, "Oh my God, you're a real person." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not just pixels, I'm real." And it's one of those things where it's like, you know, she sees me on the internet all the time, but like it's different when someone's actively like in your school and stuff. And I feel like that kind of thing, it just kind of makes it feel like a bit less detached and far removed. So I just love things like that.
Yeah. For me, I think I haven't had a chance to do as much in person, actually, so I would love to do more of that, and it's mainly because pandemic, really. But I definitely love the public speaking aspect. I mean, that's the thing I'm most comfortable with doing is presenting. Writing is something I don't feel quite as comfortable with, so I love presenting and love giving talks. So there's that, and the social media stuff's also been really fun. So like doing the campaigns has been really, really fun because it's something I can kind of see how people engage with it over the day as well, and see what people say about it, which is really lovely. And to see all these very cool people. And I'm just like, yeah, there's loads of us out there. There are many, many of us. And just to kind of showcase people from like different places around the world is really wonderful. And then the community building, actually directly interacting with people and saying, okay, like to actually hear their stories, hear what's going on with the ACE STEM Discord server. It's not, they will have conversations about being ACE, but being able to also see them have conversations about like what's it like in academia, navigating jobs, careers. Some of them talk about having disabilities as well and how they're navigating that, and just having a space for that. So yeah, those are probably all the directly interacting with people and giving talks. And the social media stuff is kind of more the, as I say, there's a visibility bit, but there's also the creative side of social media I also really enjoy. I realize you probably wanted less things. I kind of was saying I like all the things. But yeah, interacting with people is like probably my favorite thing.
I mean, it's great that you like all the things. So yeah, so this is our last question from the audience. If you guys at home still want to have discussions about activism and that kind of thing, and you're on our Discord server, there is a text discussion running parallel to this, and that channel will stay up after we're finished. So hop on there. So yeah, can you talk about ACE activism and intersectionality from your own experiences? I'm sure you have many experiences to draw from.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to kind of think of it succinctly. I think for me, I mean, I've always kind of, I was always aware, like, inherently that my experience is like intersectional, but again, I sort of stumbled into this kind of accidentally. Like, intersectionality wasn't even like a buzzword at the time. Like, diversity and inclusion wasn't a thing. So I didn't necessarily like approach it thinking like I should really often talk about like Blackness and asexuality and like dissect that. Like, that wasn't really what I started off doing. I think it was sort of more other aspects of like the visuals. But I sort of, as time went on, and I sort of started to notice that my experiences were different, not just in the way that like people perceived me compared to like white activists that I was working with, like the reactions I got were completely different, even if we're saying similar things. But also, as I sort of, the more you engage in a community, the more issues you're going to have. Like, the more I noticed that racism was an issue in the ACE community. And that's when I was like, actually, I do feel like I need to, it feels like I'm sort of lying if I don't address that, as I talk about the ACE community so often. And that was kind of when I started to think, actually, yeah, I'm going to incorporate like this intersectionality actively into all the different things that I'm doing even more, because it just kind of felt more important. And also, like, it's not like it's something that like I'm the only person who experiences it. Like, I've heard lots of races of different ethnicities talk about, you know, the sort of unspoken like racial hierarchy within the community and whitewashing and all those kind of things. But when I make a point of it, I notice people, I guess it's just like a bit more momentum when I say it. So I just kind of like to shine a light on it and then just cause chaos and let everybody hear. Everybody can join in and then just kind of get the ball rolling a bit. Because I've noticed then other people feel a bit more empowered to kind of mention it as well. And then it becomes more of a discussion, at least for a week. Then white people tend to just forget about it again, but at least for a bit. So yeah, that was kind of like the main thing that kind of motivated me to kind of tackle that intersectionality, I think.
Yeah. It's the thing I find is that it will tend to, so just thinking about people of color talking about racism in the community, like a lot of responsibility ends up going to them to fix it, or to think intersectionally tends to be taken by those who do have identities that intersect as well. And that's the thing. Whereas I feel like this should be a community responsibility, and that's just something I really don't see enough, to be quite honest. So there's a Discord group that I've also been involved with, ACAR. Oh my gosh, what does ACAR stand for? I just literally forgot off the top of my head. If somebody wants to mention it in the chat, ASPEC's Committed to Anti-Racism. Thank you. I just had one of those brain blank moments. Even with that group, many of the people who lead on that are people of color themselves, who are leading this group. And so that's the thing, is then you see this like community responsibility even in those spaces as well. But basically we do like a book club or discussion group based, and there's a book that we've also been reading as well. And I think it's been really good to have that community space for that. But as I say, it should be a community responsibility. It shouldn't fall to the shoulders of those who particularly affects as well. But I feel like I have to, like, I don't feel like we should do activism without thinking about intersectionality. It should just kind of be there. And you're right, Yasmin, it has become very much a buzzword, but I don't think it's necessary always, when people use that word, I'm not sure if they're necessarily describing what they do accurately, if they're saying, oh, I'm taking an intersectional approach, or actually doing it justice, if that makes sense. But for me, it's absolutely something that's really important to me. And I realize, as I say, I went to UK Black Pride for the first time this year, and I kind of was thinking afterwards about how important it was for me to also work with queer people of color just in general. And that's why, like, going forward, I would love to do more of that if I have time, is the issue. And the other thing is that by speaking to many Asian activists, the experiences, it's been really good to compare the experiences of being in the diaspora and living in Asian countries. But it just really highlighted to me about how Western and white centric and English speaking centric the way that asexuality resources are and the advice is given as well. And so, yes, it does frustrate me sometimes when, we can talk, let's say somebody shares something from like this one experience of like, here is a good piece of advice, which just wouldn't necessarily apply to absolutely everybody and just doesn't take into account those different experiences. I realized it was a bit of a long and rambly answer.
No, and it reminded me of, because that's actually approach is where International Asexuality Day came from in
Yeah.
the first place, which was something that we only founded like a couple years ago now. But the whole purpose with that was that, like, in other attempts to sort of have a day, it and also just because, you know, our community ends up being so Eurocentric, and it ends up being very white, ends up being very English based, and doesn't really take into consideration like the experiences that people are having in different countries and like in different parts of the diaspora and of different races and religions and everything. And that was sort of like where that came from, because it kind of felt like like the way we kind of approach activism in this conversation does kind of need a more diversified approach. And if you don't really see it happening, then you have to kind of actively do something about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a really important issue that we could probably talk about for hours, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up now because we've run out of time. So thank you to Yasmin and Sarah for agreeing to talk with all of us today. It's been really interesting. I know I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone at home also has. Just before we like disappear, would you, if we want to follow your progress or your work, how should we find you?
Well, everything for me is under at the Yasmin Benma. But oh my God, it's messed up my name. Everything. Yasmin Benwa. My website is yasminbenwa.co.uk. And if you happen to be in Belgrade on the 14th, come over to the International Human Rights Conference, because I'm going to be there on the 14th. So yeah, thanks.
I am on Twitter at Sarah_Cosgriff. So Cosgriff spelled COSGRIFF. I'm also on TikTok at ace.psycom, which is SCICOMM. Yeah, but I'll probably be more on Twitter. I also just wanted to quickly say, I should have said at the beginning, thank you so much, Yasmin, for also suggesting me to do this panel. I just wanted to say how much I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for taking part and for all the awesome work you're doing. Like, it's been very informative to me to hear all the other things going on, especially on Discord. Like, you're doing really incredible stuff. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this has been absolutely fantastic. So yeah, thank you to both of you. And also to Caro, who's our moderator in the background. Does not want to say hi. But yeah. And thank you to everyone at home for coming along and participating in the discussion. We've had loads of fantastic questions. I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you want to continue the discussion on Discord, you can. But yeah, so bye for now. Yasmin, you have to go and do the closing now.
Oh my God, yes, I do. See you at the closing, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.